All right, welcome back, everybody. We are continuing our conversation on the special report of paternity fraud, America's dirty little secret. I'm joined in studio by a filmmaker by the name of Tim Alexander, who's put out a new movie called Diary of a Tired Black Man, and also Colonel Craig Candelore, retired colonel from U.S. Army, as well as you run the Men's Legal Center in Southern California. Good to have the two of you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Tim, let's start with you. Diary of a Tired Black Man. How does this relate to paternity fraud? What moved you to do this movie?
Well, you know, it had to be done. African-American men are looked at as the worst fathers on the planet, you know, and speaking up as a black man who had my father, and there has been a broken line of fathers in my family lineage since 1825.
Wow.
You know, and I really feel that men are underrepresented, and we don't have a voice because men don't want to fight the mothers of their children. And when they're told that they're a father, they just accept it at face value. And quite often, you know, with women cheating as much as they do, they like to brag about how they can cheat better and they don't get caught. A lot of these babies really do not belong to the men that they're pinned on.
Did this happen to you?
It almost happened to me. There was a young woman that kept me in the friend box, and no matter what I did, I couldn't get out of it. And all of a sudden, she sexed me for a whole week solid. And she came to me later, pregnant and crying, and said, I was going to pin this on you. And yeah, I couldn't do it. You know, also, you know, I was married, and, you know, I had to go through the experience of fighting for my children. And, you know, I feel the courts are very unfair to fathers in a lot of different levels.
The title, Diary of a Tired Black Man, why that title?
Well, because women are often mad at men, and sometimes men get tired. They get tired of not being respected. You know, the laws favor women, and men have to go in and fight for the rights that should naturally be theirs. And it gets very tiring to have to always acquiesce to things that are unfair. And it's time that men speak up, because we really don't want to fight the mothers of our children. We don't like the system.
You sexist, you.
Hey.
Craig Candelore, you run the Men's Legal Center in Southern California. Tim sounds like he could be a spokesman for your group.
He sure can. There's a problem. It's not going away. And
by the way, this is politically incorrect, what we're saying right here, right now. But that's okay, because if it is reality of what's happening in life, we should be talking about it.
Absolutely.
And we'll let people decide whether or not it fits their own life. But go ahead, Craig.
well, we see it just anecdotally. I've got many stories where you have a married man come in, and for some circumstance, either a medical emergency or some medical test, he finds out that he's either sterile, and he says, well, wait a minute, I got 3 children, you know. Of course, you know the story. It's brutal. My second case when I was 30 years ago was a Navy man who came in, and he had been served with divorce, and the petition didn't show his second child. He said, wait a minute, what does that mean? I said, more than likely, it's not a child of the marriage. And he was just devastated. He said, well, I raised her as my own. I said, the wife is telling you that it's not a child of the marriage.
It's devastating on the man, and it's devastating on the child, too.
Both. It's just, you know, you raise him as your own. He loved her, loved the child. I know this particular gentleman, it was just devastating.
Now, you disagree with that number, 30%. You think it's way too high.
Well, I understand how she came up with the number. Basically, what she says is there's 500,000 live births. 40% are basically out of wedlock, or basically casual relationships. So you had come up with 200,000. The people, that's the target group where there's the highest percentage of paternity fraud. Young mothers, you know, young fathers. And then the DNA tests say 30%, 28 to 30% are basically excluded. So the mother names them as the father, and they're excluded. So if you run the numbers, about, I would say 44,000. But that's that with 30%.
All right, so you think it's too high. Tim, go ahead.
I would like to say to that effect, and the African-American community is quite different. We have about a 76% out of wedlock birth rate.
Wow.
And quite
That's
often...
astounding.
Yeah. Quite often, young women are enamored by the bad boys. They get pregnant. They find the most responsible man they can and make him insta-dad. You know,
so enamored by the bad boys, and they go out and select a good boy.
Yeah. And I know many people that don't know their father. It happened to my cousin. He was named as the father of a child that wasn't his. He was sterile. You know, and there's a lot of fraud.
Why do you believe, I'm going off topic a little bit here, but Tim, you've brought it up several times in our conversation. Why do you believe the numbers are so so disturbing in the African American community, the out of wedlock, the low numbers of children that live in a two-parent household. Why do you suppose they're so astounding?
There's a lot of social deconstruction. I often say the African American people were the lab rats of America.
You believe slavery led to what we see today?
No.
You do not?
No.
Okay.
Here's why.
Okay.
We were good black people in the 50s and 60s. We had the strongest families in the country. We had the lowest divorce rate, the highest marriage rate, the lowest out of wedlock birth.
Wow, that's
and the
strong
most fathers
information.
in the home. In 10 years, they destroyed us because right after the Civil Rights Bill was signed in 1965, the feminism movement brought in the sexual revolution.
Right.
That was before the pill and before abortion.
Yeah.
Women feel amorous when they're menstruating. So a lot of women, the first time they had sex, they got pregnant. Before they sought marriage and a white picket fence. But now when you're having sex with a man that was just there for the pleasure, he didn't make a lifetime commitment. So when they left, the government came in and said, we will give you money for 18 years as long as you don't work.
Right.
If there's a man in the house, you lose your money. But if you get pregnant again, we'll give you more money. So it started a culture of having babies because they were rewarded, because at the time everybody was in the poverty level.
Many on the, I don't know if you're left, right, center, but many on the left will say, well, it was the broken home of slavery that leads to what we have today. But as you say, tell me that statistic again from the 50s.
We had 84% fathers in the home. So how did a 20-year gap from the damage of slavery, how do we have the strongest families for 20 years and then in 10 years back to the weakest by a huge margin? We were socially destroyed because what they learned, the social engineers that want to, when you take the father away, you make a weaker family, so you make easier people to control.
And we are certainly seeing that in all of society today. The black demographic's been hit the hardest, but I fear we're seeing that social narrative hitting attacking all families today.
Dysfunction is big business. There are billions of dollars made in the legal system, in the this and the that, the medical profession. We need dysfunction because there's money made from it.
Craig Candelore, how did you get involved advocating for men's legal rights?
Well, I saw that the laws they're not leveled. I actually worked for the Women's Legal Center for a year, became an attorney. I have a military background, so when I got out, I said, well, let's protect women, family law.
Yeah.
And you really see the laws are just not leveled, and you really need good advocacy in family court to represent.
Now you say there are 3 ways that a person can be a victim of paternity fraud. List those 3 reasons.
Well, one, if you're married and the wife cheats on you, and then you have to challenge the paternity within 2 years. 2, if you're out of wedlock birth, generally there's a lot of pressure for the men to step up and they sign a voluntary declaration of paternity if they want to be part of the child's life. Again, you have 2 years to vacate that. Anything after that, you're dad. And then lastly, a lot of the defaults. I don't know if you know some of the statistics, like LA County, 80% are default. That means they send a letter, and if you don't respond, they get a default judgment. The average is in California is about 70% default through DCSS, which is Department of Child Support Services.
Go ahead, Tim.
I was divorced. When I got divorced, my wife said that she didn't want any child support or paternity. And about 3 years later, I get this $11,000 in the rear, and there was no order for any money. They just sent it to an address I had moved from, because they had sent me things to my current address numerous times, but they only sent and served an address I wasn't at. Then all of a sudden they ran up. So my ex-wife went down and said, I don't want anything, make it disappear. And if it wasn't for her, I'd be paying child support on an order that never existed.
How can our viewers see your movie, Diary of a Tired Black Man?
It's on Amazon.com. It's at Walmart, and it also is on the Apple iTunes Store, Diary of a Tired Black Man.
All right, attorney Craig Candelore, filmmaker Tim Alexander, we thank you for joining us on a special report of what's known as paternity fraud. Very few folks in America, I believe, are aware of what's happening there. All right, thank you for joining us. So, who will be our Mama Luke of the day? But first, it will be a cold day in D.C. when White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest disagrees with his boss, President Obama. Here he is saying climate change is much worse than terrorism. Stay with me. From the Edge of America, I'm Rick Amato. We're back after this.
Are many more people on an annual basis who have to confront the impact, the direct impact on their lives of climate change or on the spread of a disease than on terrorism.
Climate change is more of a clear and present danger to the United States than terrorism.
Well, I think even the Department of Defense has spoken to the significant threat that climate change poses to our national security interests.